The Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development has rated a co-op owned by the strong Sistas, known as Nourish Co-op. This is the second time that they have rated the co-op. Back in November 3rd of 2023, 15 of their corn and soy-free low PUFA hogs were seized due to a misunderstanding in processing. This time they are being rated due to selling raw milk and other raw farm products. This is an interesting topic, especially right now, because there seems to be a very big concern around consumers drinking raw milk, and because of the bird flu. And Michigan actually is the first state to have banned raw milk back in 1948. So this is kind of a big deal. Michigan is very stringent on selling raw milk products. And there's also, I think people have to keep in mind this, there's an interstate ban on the sale of raw milk to consumers. And I think that consumers is the interesting word to consider when looking at these cases. You know, what is a consumer versus what is an investor? And should an investor have the right to do what they choose to do with the raw farm products that are produced on the farms that they're invested in? And I would love to see one of these cases go to a Supreme Court and, you know, see what kind of outcome comes from it. Because, you know, in my opinion, a co-op is an investor-owned organization. But we'll kind of dive into this a little bit. I think that right now, the concept of selling raw milk through farm co-ops, through cow shares, all of that is going to be heavy hit because of the fears of bird flu contamination, right? They don't want people to get the bird flu, which has been happening, and then for the bird flu to spread into another pandemic. So that fear, or that presence of fear, is going to give these agencies a little more power to go beyond what you would typically consider a consumer. But this is a case where, yes, it is illegal to sell raw milk to consumers. It's not actually illegal to sell raw milk as pet milk, okay? And so I believe even in Nourish Co-op's cooperative, the milk and raw dairy products that they sell are sold as pet milk or pet dairy products. And what that means is that people aren't buying it for human consumption. But people do buy the milk and consume it. The investors in the co-op tend to buy their own products and consume them however it is that they wish to consume them. But their labeling and what they're doing, you know, technically, is it illegal? No. But, you know, with the current environment with bird flu, the FDA, the USDA, the federal agencies have been basically telling people not even to feed raw milk to calves, okay? Which are the animal that are supposed to be drinking the milk. You can't feed it to calves, you can't feed it to animals, don't give it to anybody. Destroy the raw milk that is not pasteurized because it could contain this deadly virus. And I think that that is ultimately what these girls and their co-op are up against, is that fear. And you know, I've done numerous videos on bird flu and how unusual this particular strain seems to have been, but you can't deny that there's that fear out there. And anytime that there is a fear of a pandemic, a fear of an outbreak, a fear of the unknown, the government tends to end up with a lot more power over these situations. Whether or not that's right or not, I don't know. I'm gonna, you know, in a lot of these videos, I let you guys formulate your own opinions. I throw out, you know, some of the things that I think through when I hear about this stuff, and I'll give you my overall opinion on these farm co-ops. And just up front, that is that I don't think that they should be regulated the same way that we regulate goods going to a grocery store for public consumers. And that's what it really comes down to, is public versus private. You know, are these informed consumers that have an informed risk, that are making their own decisions? Are they consumers at all? When you operate a farm co-op, or any type of co-op for that matter, generally the people who are members of that co-op are the owners of the co-op. So they are the ones who are investing money into the farms and buying the products. Where some of these co-ops get a little tricky is that they then buy products from other farms. And so how far does that investment go? Where, you know, when you look at a cow share, that is a straight investment into the animal. It's not a third party producing the milk that's then going into the co-op. So I do think that there is a difference in layer of protection when you go in and you buy a cow share versus when you go into a co-op. This particular co-op has made contracts with other small farms to join into the co-op. And I don't know the whole extensiveness of how this operation works, but I'm assuming that there's, you know, some sort of agreement where the co-op members are investors into the operations of a lot of these small farms are Amish farms. Amish always seem to be at the heart of these things, right? So they've basically contracted with these farms and said, hey, look, we'll give you a premium for what you're receiving selling publicly if you can give us the raw goods, the raw nourishing foods. The state of Michigan and the FDA and the USDA argue that raw milk is dangerous. There are also a lot of health professionals out there and a lot of people who would claim that raw milk is more nutritious. The thing about raw milk, and from the research that I have done, and I don't, you know, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, is yes, there are risks associated with raw products. Anytime you eat a raw product, there's a risk, especially if your immune system hasn't been able to develop and adapt to that risk. Most of the risk that happens with these products is mass production, okay? And what we've seen in the past and what has led up to, you know, the pasteurization process all the way through sterilization of any nutrients in the milk is that the animals, as we've got them closer and closer together in confinement and started giving them more and more antibiotics, the diseases themselves became more resistant to them. And so if you were to go and get raw milk from a large commercial dairy, you would probably get sick. But if you were to take raw milk, you know, a lot of people, homesteaders for centuries, have had a dairy cow on their property, and you know they've managed just a few cows in a very clean environment, natural environment where the cow has natural immunity. In those cases, I actually think that you may see that the risks are very, very small. And I think that that's one of the things that these co-ops are doing is they're working with farms that are similar to that. But whether, you know, I'm not going to get into whether and how safe it is or isn't safe. I'm just saying, based on the research that I have done, it seems like that would be a safer environment. A lot of where we started running into these problems with raw milk actually happened in these large CAFOs. But anyway, you know, I am not a doctor and I'm not somebody who can give you medical advice on that type of stuff. This is all just opinion on, you know, this particular situation and bringing awareness to the fact that it's happening over and over and over again. I think the bigger question that has to be addressed is, you know, what defines a consumer and what level of jurisdiction does the government have between public transactions and private transactions? I've said on this channel several times in the past that for an uninformed consumer going to the grocery store that doesn't do their own research, doesn't understand or doesn't even want to get into where their food is coming from, how it's raised, how it's processed, they cannot make an informed decision on what they buy. And the government makes that decision for them. And that's really kind of what a lot of these programs were put in place for, was to protect those people who don't want to be educated, who don't want to be informed, that just want a carefree lifestyle, eating things that have had their nutrition completely baked out of them. On the flip side of that, you have informed consumers, consumers who are able to do their own research, consumers who are aware of certain risks. Should those consumers be able to make their own choices in a private transaction? And that's where I think, you know, there's got to be a division at some point between how much control our government has over those private transactions. Basically, what they're saying is they're telling you, no, you can't invest in this farming operation and then buy your own products, which are basically just paying for the stock in your own farming operation, because you have multiple shareholders. Anytime you take stock out, you need to provide more investment in, right? What they're saying is you don't have the right to do that. You know, this isn't just a right of the people running the co-op, but this is a right of the people who are investing, the members of the co-op. You don't have the right to make your own decisions, or you don't have the right to take your own risks. Now, for a lot of people, you have to remember that there are people out there who depend on raw foods for nourishment, and really, I mean, you know, whether or not it's better for all of us, in my opinion, you know, there's a lot of benefits to raw foods. I think it's something you have to step yourself into, but once you get there, there are a lot of reasons why you would want raw honey over pasteurized honey. Yes, I say pasteurized honey. Point is you have to do that research, and you have to be an informed consumer, in my opinion, to be able to go down that road. But there shouldn't be somebody standing there at the gate with lock and key telling you you can't go down that road. If you have reached that level of knowledge to the point where you are a shareholder within an organization that creates food, raises animals, raises vegetables, raises bees, at that point you are not only informed, but you are invested. And there really shouldn't be anything there that says you can't buy your own milk or buy your own stock. In a normal year, most people would agree with me on this. Most people would say, yeah, no, they really shouldn't get themselves involved in private transactions between an informed buyer and seller. I mean, there's really no reason for involvement at that level. The purpose of the organization is to protect the uninformed consumer going to the grocery store. And I don't have a problem with that. I think, you know, if something is going to end up on a grocery store shelf that is knowingly going to an uninformed consumer, other than, you know, the nutrients and the nutritional facts on the labeling, which most of them don't look at anyway. If they did, they'd go, oh, well, there's a bunch of weird words on there. It must be some sort of food. It's chemicals, folks. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that there should be some sort of pathway to make food available for people who just simply don't want to understand it or know about it. But for those who are private individuals making a private transaction outside of the public grocery or consumer base, should there be regulatory oversight of it? And like I said, most of you would agree on any normal year that is the case. But I have a feeling that there's going to be less people agreeing with that as long as fears of the bird flu pandemic continue to circulate in the marketplace. I mean, there's always a new article on this, you know, whether it's getting into beef supply and the agencies caught it, woohoo, heroes, or it's gotten into the milk supply, but it's safe because it's been pasteurized. The narrative here is pretty clear, but it doesn't change, you know, when these things happen and we enter these times. I want each of you to really think about this. Focus in on the overall concept of, should your rights as a private investor be dictated by an agency on whether or not you can consume the stock in which you have helped create? Should the government be involved in your private transactions between people? This is something I think should be argued up to a much higher level court system so that we could have an understanding nationwide for these farm co-ops, what's allowed, what isn't allowed, what is a consumer versus what is an investor, and what are investor rights, because I think that's what it comes down to. So these girls, just so you guys are aware of who they are, Nourish has only been around a few years. And when they first opened their doors, they had an issue with some pigs that were getting slaughtered. They ended up having to throw them out. It was 15 hogs, and apparently it was down to a misunderstanding. I haven't read anywhere what that misunderstanding was, so I can't speak on or against it. For this current situation, they have started several fundraisers. They have a t-shirt fundraiser, which has performed fairly well, and they also have a donation campaign, which you can find through their website. I would always go through these people's websites instead of picking up on, you know, especially if the donations are supposed to be going to a particular group or cause. And what they are doing is they are arguing. They're not just, you know, appeasing regulations, but they are challenging, you know, what is being put in front of them as a roadblock. And I respect that, because I do think that there needs to be more clarity on this. And depending on what that clarity is, you know, maybe there needs to be something done at the legislative, on the legislative branch. So the strong Sistas are a couple girls who were having a lot of health problems with the food that they were eating. And I think a lot of people face this in today's society. And a lot of that is because if you do look at those nutrition labels on the back of food, there's a lot of complicated words back there. And those complicated words are often leading to complicated health situations. So what they had discovered for themselves, and you know, I can't say whether or not it works for everybody, but what they discovered for themselves was that by returning to a raw food diet, they were much healthier. They were much more vibrant. Their weight was more in check. And this is something that I have heard from a lot of different people, and I have kind of experienced myself. Again, I'm not giving health advice because I can't do that. I'm just saying that that's the thought process that's behind the company that they have then set up. That says, hey, look, we want to take raw farm foods, organic foods, truly organic, that haven't been tainted by anything, even tainted by what they're fed. You know, they don't want certain feeds being fed to their pigs and animals, because that feed, you know, you are what you eat. Okay, so everything that these girls do by the laws of nature are very clean. I say by the laws of nature because, you know, clean has many different meanings these days. And that is the basis kind of this co-op that they set up with partnerships and basically co-op members who are investors in the co-op. And anybody involved in the co-op who's invested has the right to buy stock of whatever the co-op produces in amongst itself. And that's what I was talking about with a private sale versus a public sale. The strong Sistas started out with Angel Acres, which was their farm, and with this co-op, they kind of expanded. So right at the moment, while they're figuring this out, I don't think the co-op is accepting new members. They're trying to take care of their existing members. The reason why they're doing fundraisers is because they lost $90,000 worth of product. They got some of that back. From my understanding, they're able to sell raw honey again. They have sourdough. And again, this is, when I use the word selling, this is stock given back to investors, and those investors, if they want it, are paying to replace that stock. To be technical, that's the type of transaction that's taking place, from my understanding of how these co-ops are run. And every co-op is different. You know, I would say that if you are one of these people who want to start up a farming co-op, you really need to dig into the regulations, how you're setting it up, and making sure that this is within an investor circle. I'm not offering legal advice, I'm asking you to go find it. But again, you know, Michigan health experts right now are very keen on this subject of raw milk. And I see a push here that is going beyond, you know, the typical laws of consumer protection, or, you know, the need to tell consumers what's safe for them or what's not. And I see this going into these private transactions. At the end of the day, that's the question that has to be answered, is should the government be involved in our lives to that extent, to that level? I don't think so. I think it's an overreach. And I think that if somebody challenges this all the way up, and a lot of the times these things, when they play out in these local courts or in state courts, they don't end up in a position where they need to be challenged. But if this were to be challenged all the way up, or if somebody were to take this type of case to the Supreme Court, you know, how much jurisdiction do state or federal government agencies have over those private relationships, that don't involve the public, that don't involve the consumer. So anyway, that's just another one of these co-op shutdowns to pay attention to. If you want to support them, I've given you some information down below, and like I said, you can go straight through their website to find all of the information that you need to find. But guys, this is something to think about, something to talk to your legislators about. I think that it ultimately, you know, our freedom to eat what we want to eat, besides other people, of course, is our right to choose. It's our bodies. We should have the ultimate agency over our body. We should be able to make the ultimate choice over what goes into our bodies. We shouldn't be told what can or cannot go into our bodies, and we shouldn't have, you know, some sort of agency forcing us to put a particular type of product into our bodies. But with these potential pandemics, what we've seen again and again and again is people willing to give up agency over their own body, and when they are willing to do that, and they're willing to support the government taking that away from private individuals, these types of situations tend to escalate. And I think that that's one of the challenges that these girls are going to face with this particular case, is that there is an elevated risk at the current moment. And, you know, could that elevated risk be translated into, well, you could get sick from bird flu and then you could pass it on to somebody else, so therefore we have the right to regulate you. It's an interesting concept, and it's something that I think that if we don't start asking questions and we don't start raising awareness to it, we will lose those rights. Anyway, guys, stay tuned and we'll talk soon.